Hello, everyone. This is your host, Manoj Tandon. Welcome to another episode of Dark Rhino Security Confidential. Today, we have another awesome guest, but before I announce him, please hit the like and subscribe button. We still work for the algorithms, and every one of those helps us out so we can keep bringing this great content to you free of cost. Today, we have a phenomenal guest joining us. He has over 25 years of experience in the industry. He is Matt Devost. He is in the field of cybersecurity, risk management, and he is a national security expert. He is the CEO and co-founder of OODA and Devsec. He has previously founded the Terrorism Research Center. We're going to talk to him a little bit about that, and the Cybersecurity Consultancy, and FusionX, which was acquired by Accenture. So great string of successes there. And at Accenture, if that wasn't enough, he led the global cyber defense practice and has had key leadership roles at iDefense, iSIGHT Partners, Total Intel, SDI, Tulco Holdings, and Technical Defense. So he's an expert to say the least. Matt, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you just got off a plane, so we appreciate you having here.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So you know what? Give us a little bit of your starter story here, how your origins. How did you get into this field? Was this your dream job, or did twists and turns kind of take you here?
Yeah, I think, I've got to be the architect of my own profession to a certain extent. I had this weird combination of academic interest that was national security with a focus on what we call kind of gray area phenomena and terrorism, gray states, etc. And also was a hacker and computer scientist. And I came to this realization really in 1992 that those two worlds were colliding. I could see the increased dependence that our, companies and infrastructures were starting to have on technology. Obviously, it was still very early days, but the trend line was there. There was an inevitability of the internet. And then I also, through my, insights into the hacker community, was seeing how all of those systems were getting compromised. And I had this little bit of an aha moment where I said, geez, this is a national security risk. If I put my national security hat on and I bring this technical understanding to the equation, there is the emergence of new risks here that are going to need to be managed that nobody's paying attention to. So, not knowing any better, I started writing on the topic. I started speaking on the topic, and it turned out I attracted a lot of attention to myself. Ended up making it the focus of my graduate thesis. I wrote my graduate thesis on national security in the information
Okay.
age, which really was information warfare, cybersecurity. And to some of the US government folks who, unbeknownst to me, had written a top secret directive in 1992 on the same exact topic, they kind of viewed me as the guy in his garage building the atomic bomb. I had no access to classified information, I had no insight, was not a member of the Department of Defense or intelligence community, was writing a lot of the same stuff. So that resulted in me getting my first job out of grad school, going and working in a technical capacity supporting Department of Defense and intelligence community.
That is really cool. Now I got to ask you, from that era, did you? I'm sure you've heard of Tom Clancy. Uh,
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
In fact,
Did you?
Tom Clancy used to be a participant in some of our Terrorism Research Center message boards. So we had email exchanges back and forth with him back when he was still alive.
I was going to say, did you get a chance to meet him? And it sounds like you would have been a great source for, had he written a book on cyber infiltration.
Yeah, I did not get to meet him in person, but definitely we interacted with him over email. He was a very thorough researcher, and we did talk to him, about counterterrorism related issues and some cybersecurity related stuff back in the day. And uh, I definitely see thematics, the things that I was kind of instrumental in, with regards to the release of unrestricted warfare, the Chinese military paper back in the late 90s. that wind up making it in, Tom Clancy and other novels, and then some of the Chinese stratagems that I would apply to thinking in this space. I wrote a quick essay about how I encountered one in a recent Clancy novel, the continuation of the franchise. So it definitely is interesting to see some of that fictional work represent some of the stuff that we were talking about in real life.
So you've had a fascinating view of cyber strategy, defense, risk management, national infrastructure level.
Mm.
Really, how do you handle an environment which is unlike any when you look at a typical militaristic scenario? So, when you have a operational theater where you have an enemy and you're defending against them or destroying them, whatever the case may be, you're over here and they're over there. But in the case of cyber crime and infiltration, they're already here. The enemy is within,
Mm.
and they've already compromised systems. And now you're being asked to manage that kind of a risk. What's the strategy and approach for this?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of different components to that. The first, as you mentioned, is always try and get people to realize that the attacker is going to find some mechanism to breach your perimeter defenses. In 2010, helped write the first ever DoD strategy on cyber, and presumption of breach was something I fought pretty hard to make sure that that was included, because your security strategy has to be able to demonstrate how you're going to operate and maintain your mission capability after there's been some sort of penetration, right? We can't just
Exactly.
say, oh, things are penetrated, disconnect from the network or shut things down. No, lives are at stake. You have to continue to operate, right? Similar to the same way that, a soldier with a wounded arm or wounded leg might stay in the fight, right?
Right.
So you need to keep your systems in the fight. So that's one element of it. The other element of it is that recognition, as you mentioned, that they're going to penetrate our systems, and they might engage in something that I've referred to for decades as time shifted intent. And we need to have that focus on understanding that there are attackers that attack us right now, and they have a current intent. There's something that they want to accomplish, something that they want to steal, or some attack that they want to take place. We see that a lot in the commercial world. They want to steal intellectual property, they want to steal money, they want to cause a denial of service, right? So the intent is aligned with the timing of the attack. But when you bring that up to a national strategic level, there are attacks that are taking place that are basically positioning themselves for future intent.
Yes.
They recognize that they might want to engage in an attack against those systems, or cause a denial of service, or take a critical infrastructure down, but they don't have the current intent to do so. But I'm a national security realist, and one of the analogies that I always use is, pretend that it's prior to World War II, and you are president of the United States, and your team comes and briefs you and says, we believe we're going to be in conflict with Germany, armed conflict, and we have this plan. We're going to go and anonymously install explosives in their ball bearing manufacturing plants,
Okay.
and we're going to position them. You don't need to push the button. We can do it without attribution. But in the event we wind up in conflict with them, and in the event that you choose to push that button, it will greatly diminish their warfighting capability, and it will save lives and shorten the duration of the conflict. Do you do it? Of course, any national security realist is going to say yes. I can do it without attribution. I don't ever have to use the capability. And if I do use the capability in the future, it's going to give me tremendous advantage, and it's going to save lives. We
Exactly.
have to recognize that cyber attackers are looking at our critical infrastructure the same way. They'll penetrate in, establish the capability to impact it, and they may never use it, but they want to make sure that that is an option that's available to them in the event of future cyber conflict, conventional conflict, economic conflict, or even just kind of some sort of geopolitical, tangle that we have.
It's the perfect weapon. In fact,
Yes.
David Sanger wrote the book that was the exact title. Though it was very apropos. The
Yep.
perfect weapon.
Yeah.
And
Excellent book as well.
that you um you nailed it. It's something where delayed intent, they're going to get in, and then if need be, you utilize it. Um, Given that fact, the uniqueness with us compared to some other nation states that face the same dilemma is that a lot of our infrastructure is in private hands. So you look at electrical generation, distribution,
Hmm.
transmission, and all three of those may be owned by different parties,
Hmm.
right? Water, usually municipal level, but some potential, you know, privatization there. Medical is all private, all over the place. How does how do you convince then critical infrastructure, or what is being done to harden things that are in private hands or not under government
Yeah.
control?
I think, the government obviously tries to influence the process through information sharing and analysis centers, which obviously are aligned with critical infrastructures, with agencies like CISA, right, that are focused
Yeah.
on interfacing with the private sector. Um, but at the end of the day, I think by way of awareness and preparation, the cyber criminals kind of assist in that as well, right? With regards to ransomware risks and things of that sort that are hitting some of these targets and demonstrating some of these vulnerabilities. At time, I've been able to articulate, in a board meeting or in a meeting with a lot of different CEOs from different critical infrastructure providers, the risk here and their attention that is required to it. And then the other mechanism that I've spent almost the entirety of my career in some capacity is red teaming. Right, we can go in and emulate the attacker, and we can demonstrate the art of the possible and help them find those attack pathways and those elements of the kill chain that can be remediated prior to an attacker getting in. Obviously, time is not on our side there.
Right.
This interconnectedness, the increased dependence on technology that I first wrote about over 30 years ago. We are fully there. So that means you also have to engage in some threat hunting, and you have to engage in threat hunting that is not just looking for signatures or indicators of prior attacks, but being a little bit creative, bringing a little bit of that red teaming perspective. If I were accessing these systems and I just wanted to dwell without any sort of exploitation, I don't need to move laterally, I don't need to beacon out. What does that look like? What systems do I target? How do I establish that? How do I maintain persistence in that kind of less dynamic type of attack profile? So it's a combination of lots of different strategies that range from just education and awareness to public private sector cooperation to red teaming to threat hunting, and then obviously deploying robust enterprise cyber risk management programs inside these critical infrastructure providers.
How well are we doing as a country in the defense of the national infrastructure?
I would say the fact that you can go back and read my thesis that's exactly 30 years old this year. And a lot of the recommendations that I make in that thesis are still recommendations that are being made today, probably not doing so great.
Right.
Um, I say by nature, the fact that as a red teamer had almost a perfect success rate. In fact, operated for 25 years with a 100% success rate. If there was a target, we went after it. And that's not just that, like, we spearphished somebody and got on a desktop. We counted success as being in a position to achieve our objective, right? Steal money from the bank, turn the power off, whatever the objective of the red team was in that equation. So it's tough. Jen Easterly just wrote a paper on that and wrote an essay on that in Foreign Affairs. I recommend people check out. I think it just came out, yesterday, day before yesterday, that talks about how we are kind of losing on cyber defense, but maybe there's some hope with regards to some of the new technologies that are emerging, that there's a role that AI can play, right, in assisting humans in taking on this enormous problem set, right? Technology has been deployed to just, an incredibly wide aperture. And as a
Right.
result, the security risk and, security profile of that is also super wide. So we're going to need some new strategies and some new approaches. Cybersecurity industry has a really hard time innovating. We tend to recreate the same solutions in a different form and call that innovation when we really need to innovate in entirely new and unanticipated ways.
No, in our space, we're dealing with much smaller companies typically, and they're always like, "Well, let's look at the CISA top 10 or whatever in the IT." It's like, forget the top 10, get the top three right, man. You
Yeah.
can do the if you can do the top three, we're better off
Yeah.
than 90% of the field. Top
Yeah.
10, well, you're really going for the Super Bowl here. Just
Mm,
let's let's do the top three. And when we look at the breach patterns, at least the way they come across our operations center, the same things just repeat over and over and over again. There's just the attack surface is so large and the low hanging fruit is so easy to get that um,
yeah.
frankly, I
It
think
doesn't
there's a failure
require
of
the,
imagination. I
yeah.
I've put that I think on the leadership teams and the cybersecurity teams. There's just a failure of imagination in many respects as to what is really possible and what can happen to them.
Yeah.
And because they're
And as you
always
said,
surprised when it does. Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
yeah, yeah. No, I was gonna say, like, you mentioned that, right? Like the failure of imagination. Obviously, that's one component of it. But there are the addressable risks, right? I'm a big fan of the book, The Gray Rhino by Michelle Walker. In that, she talks about, we understand the concept of black swans. Black swans are unanticipated events, right? And that's where, we really need to increase our ability to imagine the threat and kind of anticipate the unexpected, right? Where we can be super creative. But then she uses the analogy of a gray rhino. Gray rhino is the risk that is visible, that we could confront, that we could action, but we fail to. We kind of like freeze. If a big rhino is standing in front of you, it's one of the most dangerous animals for human beings. Um, and we kind of freeze and we see it, and there's actions that we could take, but we don't do anything. And I think that's a really great analogy also for managing cyber risk, is that we oftentimes encounter enterprises that just don't address the gray rhinos, the obvious risk for which there are actions that can be taken. As you mentioned, the top three vulnerabilities, or work your way to the top 10. So part of it is just getting people out of this inertia mode and getting them to be biased for taking action when we do have known and observable risks that they're going to have to deal with.
Has there been any approaches that you have found highly effective in overcoming that inertia? Any advice there?
I think educating, the leadership team, engaging in red teaming, where you do demonstrate that the risk has a material impact on the company. I've had multiple scenarios over the course of my career where, I'm in front of a board of directors for a Fortune 10 company, and they've got their list of top 10 risks. And they say that, in this instance, cyber was number 7 on the list. And as a result, it was kind of getting the prioritization. There were 6 things above it that were getting funded, greater funding, were higher priority, were viewed as top management concerns. And I asked the board and the executive team, I said, give me 3 things that could happen to your business that would be consequential, meaning, it's going to require reporting to the SEC. It's going to, impact your business operations, going to impact your customers in a super significant way, not small attacks, or catastrophic, where it's, existential potential risk to the business. And for a Fortune 10 company, they almost get that kind of too large to fail
Right.
perspective. So thinking about that catastrophic risk is hard. So they came up with 3 things. They said, well, here are 3 things that could happen to us that would be really, really bad. And then I went off with the CISO over the next quarter, and we demonstrated that all 3 of those bad things they were trying to prevent, the easiest mechanism for which somebody could achieve them was through a cyber attack. And thus educated, the board said, oh, geez, well, cyber risk is actually our number 1 risk. And they moved it to the top of the stack, and they started giving the CISO the budget that was required to kind of maintain parity with the risks that they were facing. So oftentimes I've used, the red teaming and the ability to demonstrate the real impact and consequences of some of these cyber risks, right? I'm not briefing them and saying, hey, you have 55, high the risk vulnerabilities and 750 medium and a 1200 low risk vulnerabilities. We're coming in and saying, we emulated sophisticated organized crime targeting your financial institution with the intent of stealing money. And here's how we stole tens of millions of dollars out of your bank, like literally exited the bank undetected. And that's the risk, right? And all of a sudden it becomes super tangible. So to the extent that you can engage in some of those exercises where you make the risk tangible, you make the consequences understood, where now they can start to think through the impact, they immediately start thinking through, oh, geez, if we lost tens of millions of dollars undetected, how big could that number go? How would we manage it? How would we recover, right? It steps them through that thought process. that makes something that maybe was feeling inaccessible to them as it relates to thinking about cyber risk suddenly feels very grounded in what's important to the business.
So, Matt, obviously you did not consult with Jaguar Land Rover then recently.
Yeah.
Because what you just described, they are absolutely experiencing in the
Hmm.
most tangible of ways.
Yeah, a lot of companies are, right? I mean, just have to read the headlines every week to see the impact that cyber attacks are having. It's Jaguar, Land Rover, right now, a couple weeks ago, it was a beer manufacturer in Japan. I mean, like every week there are headlines that emerge where there is real impact to businesses as a result of a cyber attack.
Now, in your instance, you're able to get a contract and a get out of jail free card to actually do these red teaming exercises and tangibly demonstrate. I guess a question for you with this, you've been in the government space for some time and advising. Is there maybe a change in policy that could be had for white hatters, if you will, that if you can demonstrate an infiltration and then you report that, you're not charged criminally?
So I think we have some of that with regards to these structured bug bounty programs or, the hacking defense, et cetera. It's hard to open it up beyond that, right? You don't want 100,000 hackers trying to spearfish executives in a company or penetrate their internal networks and doing things that look like real attacks. You also want to make sure you've got qualified people that understand the concept of do no harm, that have the technical expertise to know what types of systems they're encountering, right? There are attacks that you can launch, and I've seen other red teamers do it, that result in systems going down or result in unintended consequences. So I don't think it like an open license for white hats to go and find vulnerabilities outside the structured kind of bug bounty programs that already exist would be that feasible.
Well, Matt, the state of Ohio, the Department of State in the state of Ohio, they've actually put it out there publicly that anyone can try and hack their website and try and get in, and they will not hold them criminally liable if they tell them how they did it.
Sure, I mean
Which,
that's basically like a self-run bug bounty program,
yeah,
right?
it
They
is.
put, I'm sure they put parameters on kind of what's in scope and what's not in scope, and it
Actually,
sounds
I
like
don't
maybe the
think there's not. You should go. That would be an interesting read for you.
yeah, I'll go check it out.
Go check it out. Check it out. Uh, but what's interesting there is that they really haven't gotten too many takers on it. So you would think that people might want to go off and do it, but not much noise has been heard. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
Well, the incentives need to be there too. I mean, did they offer a reward or, I mean, you
No,
can go work
it's
in one of these commercial bug bounty programs and actually get paid for doing the same thing. So, if the incentives are misaligned, you're definitely not going to attract talent.
well, which brings us to in a bug bounty program. If we do find a real vulnerability, it's worth a lot more on the black market. Uh,
It is, but then you got to live with yourself that you may potentially enabled crime.
I guess everyone has a price, Matt. I mean, I'm gonna leave it. It's the reality of it, right? I mean, that's why you get so many companies that are. I mean, what's the name? I forget the name of the program. It's an Israeli organization that guarantees
NSO
access
group.
to. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's
Looked at the
obvious.
different, yeah, the different mechanism, right? I mean,
Mhm.
they've built a business line around kind of nefarious tactics to get access to, super high consequence individuals, and not a big fan of their business model or the tactics that they've used in the past. So
But it seems like they've made a good chunk of change,
yes,
to put it mildly.
yeah.
Eh. On when you wrote your thesis compared to today, what are the major changes that you have seen that have happened in the industry from a threat perspective?
From a threat perspective. I think it's just been the hyper acceleration of the threats that we knew were coming, right? First, the connectivity needed to happen, right? So when I wrote the thesis, it was kind of like the connectivity is coming, the internet is coming. A year later, in 1996, I wrote a paper with my colleagues, Neil Pollard and Brian Houghton, that became the first kind of academic journal peer reviewed paper on cyber terrorism. And we named that paper that was titled Information Terrorism, Can You Trust Your Toaster? And we were kind of having fun with the title, but the intent was there to talk about, like, look, someday your toaster is going to be connected to the internet, right? So I mean, even to 29 years ago, we were prescient enough to see that that was kind of the inevitability of connectivity. So you get the connectivity, and with the connectivity, there's tremendous business value, right? We've enabled incredibly, high growth economies and technology and innovation as a result of the commercialization of the internet and kind of all of the value that that brought. But that adopting of technology was done probably without adequate discussion or review of the risk, right? It was a big rush to market. Security was in the back seat. That's been kind of the steady state. It's hard to get people to think about security prior to building a product, prior to deploying a new, type of network, because it slows them down, and people don't like to be slowed down, especially when there are economic incentives with being first to market, et cetera. So, as a result, that allowed for the formation and the development of the cybersecurity field and all of the solutions associated with that are basically coming in and trying to catch up, trying to put patchwork in place, right? Trying to address the fact that maybe we've deployed these technologies without adequate security protection. So let's put some endpoint detection on there and maybe detect when they get compromised. And we started to deploy useful technologies, and I'm a big fan of Jay Healy's work up at Columbia University when they looked at, what technology stacks have we deployed that have had the greatest impact on the attacker. One of the things on the list was, home routers with NAT, right? Which, put us in a deny all, everything out, deny everything in, which was a huge leap from the prior deployments of these cable modems where, we hopped on a network and, your peers on the network were your neighbors that were also connected to that cable modem infrastructure. I'm sure anybody old enough will remember browsing for music and seeing what people were exposing. I mean, it was super
Yeah.
interesting times, but they're a very simple approach, and a change in the architecture of how we connected to these internets provided tremendous value. So from a threat perspective, right, the threat actors are also able to anticipate the changes in technology and understand the value proposition associated with, the economics associated with technology development and innovation, and they've positioned themselves repeatedly to be able to take advantage of that, right? So there are economics for cybercrime, and then the same way that there are economics for cybercrime, right? I always refer back to the old Willie Sutton quote: "Why do you rob banks? It's because it's where the money is." Well,
Yeah.
why do I engage in cyber attack against banks? It's because it's where the money is. How much cash do you have in your pocket? The rest of your wealth is represented by ones and zeros on somebody else's system, most likely.
Yeah.
uh, the rest of our lives moved online. The rest of our infrastructure moved online. Our military capability became interconnected and dependent on technology. So as a result, the threat actors in that space emerged as well. And we started to have the emergence of the kind of national security associated risks in this space. So I think the challenge is, the technology deployed so rapidly, it provided an opportunity for the threat actors to kind of out innovate, and they've been able to out innovate ahead of us for 30 years now. And what we really need to do is kind of recapture the advantage where we stop ceding it to the attackers.
Yeah. There's a lot there, and what and you mentioned the acceleration. Agentic AI is probably going to speed this up even faster. So how do you even close that gap?
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, we had that period of kind of rapid evolution, right? And it's rapid is in terms of decades. With the emergence of the internet and the disruption that they had, I believe we're positioned with AI and these associated other suites of disruptive technologies, autonomous systems, right, which is hugely dependent on AI, quantum computing, right, which is one of those emerging gray rhino risks that we talk about.
Yeah.
Every expert that I talk to agrees it's coming. They don't agree when, but they agree it's coming. So it represents a real risk. The agentic AI, or kind of the LLMs, that's another exponential technology, and we as human beings have a really hard time grasping the concept of exponentials. uh, Things change in a way that we are not able to anticipate or adapt, because the step change from point A to point B is so great, and then that next year B to C is double that, and then C to D is double that. uh, the Tofflers nailed it, I think, back 40 plus years ago when they wrote Future Shock. They were just super early. I believe we're entering into the Future Shock era right now. Just look at the changes, in any given 6 months in the LLMs and agentic AI.
Oh, it's 6 months is like 6 years in other industries.
Yeah, even more so. The analogy I like to use when I do public speaking is the fable associated with the invention of the game of chess, right? Which you have a king in a kingdom that is bored and is looking for forms of entertainment, and he puts out an edict, bring forth your ideas. And a peasant comes and has invented this game of chess, and the king becomes enamored with it, and he's asked the peasant, I will give you anything you want as a reward. Just name your price. And the peasant says, "Oh, it's simple, Your Majesty. I simply want 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the third," right? And then doubling every time.
Yeah.
And the king, in his comprehension of what the ask was, says, "Oh my God, I'm getting this invention for a pile of rice on a chessboard." But if you do the math out to 64 squares, it's more
It's
rice than the modern economy produces in 77 years, right? Like that's an
Yep.
incomprehensible thing of rice. When we look at LLMs and the AI technologies that we have right now, everyone always thinks, "Oh, well, we're on square three." And in reality, no. As it relates to these technologies, we are already on the back half of the chessboard. So the number that gets doubled year over year is hugely, hard for us to comprehend. We're not early stages with these technologies. We're kind of late stages. There are things that have been in development as well for decades, and it's just been step ups in the approaches that we use. It's been revisiting approaches that were developed decades ago, but then the increase based on Moore's law, which was a doubling every 18 months
Yep.
of compute power, an increase in compute that has allowed for the art of the possible and for these technologies to advance now in that kind of second half of the chessboard.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you put it that way, I can see a lot of people just saying, you know what, we'll just throw up our hands and we'll leave it to Providence.
Yeah, I think there's gonna, I always tell leadership, inaction is action in of itself. So you can
Yep.
ignore the problem, you can decide not to do anything, or you can lean in, and you might make some mistakes, but at least you'll be doing something, and you'll be trying to learn, and you'll be trying to understand how these technologies are going to impact your business and your people and your operations, right? Uh, you mentioned previously that you're on the board of an academic institution, as
Right.
am I, right? Academic institutions cannot ignore the emergence of these technologies. They are going to be impactful. Private industry cannot ignore these changes. And I have around, advising companies, how disruptive technology like AI will impact them, all sorts of interesting conversations from agricultural type companies, the high tech companies, and guess what, they're all asking the same questions. And the only time that I've ever seen them all ask the same type of questions was the emergence of the internet itself, where they all said, how do I get connected, how do I put my business online? Now they are all asking, how do I take advantage of these technologies, because I know my competitors are going to, and I don't want to get left at disadvantage.
Right. But then there'll be an afterthought to security. And my point in that is going to be
Of
you look
course.
at all the SCADA vendors.
Yeah.
That technology has not changed in eons, and it wasn't designed with security in the mind
Yeah.
at the top of
It's changed in that we made it more user accessible.
mind.
So,
Well,
put
yeah. Now
GUIs on top of stuff, and like I used to have that same argument, like accessing a SCADA system to try and take down a power grid was pretty complex, right? You had to understand how to connect to it. It usually was, a lot of them were connected to modems in the old days, and it was mismatched protocols. It wasn't the same way you connected to your bulletin board system or your AOL, access. And then over time, of course, we connected them straight up to IP networks, and then we built nice GUIs on top of those ancient systems so that users didn't need to learn how to navigate the command line and the structure associated with it. We gave them the kind of point and click capability. So what happens now when an attacker is able to obtain access to one of those systems? You don't have that, barrier of familiarity required with the old technology, the SCADA systems. We've given them the kind of the interface to facilitate easy access.
Well, made their life easier. And I guess that's also part of the point is that it's not just the companies, it's the technology providers themselves have to really look at their products and applications which were built in an era where a lot of these things were not in their imagination.
And
And
that's the role that AI might play, right? Attackers are going to move at machine speed, so defense is going to have to move at machine speed. So we might develop strategies that empower or give agency to some of these technologies to help us secure them. But not thinking about security and product design is also a decades old problem, right?
yeah,
There's a story I like to tell about getting hired to do an assessment of a IP based satellite network. And we got the request for proposal, we responded, we became one of the 3 finalists. We went in, did our verbal briefs, answered questions, got the award, did the kickoff meeting, left there with like 800 pages of manuals of this satellite system and all the components and how it worked and the firmware and everything. And we took it back and studied it. And I finally went back to the team at the satellite manufacturer and I said, hey, we're ready to bang on this thing. Like, how do we get access to it in the lab and what's required? And they said, what do you mean bang on the satellite? Well, I said, you hired us to do this red team of this satellite. We're ready to access the technology now and see what we can find. And we have some ideas just based on, the manuals for how you built it. And they said, no, you don't understand. The satellite's already in space. We went through that whole process with them thinking, they're doing an assessment of it in space and us thinking we're doing an assessment of it pre-launch. And then I had to explain to the management team that like the impact we could have on the security profile of that satellite was greatly diminished by the fact that they already put it in space. Right. So that to me has become, a story that is indicative of what we deal with, of not thinking about security until it's too late. We get too far in the development process. And if you try and retrofit security, oftentimes maybe it's going to be hard, it's not going to be a good fit, or it's going to be super costly. And as a result, there might be deliberate decisions made to say like, well, security is a little too tough. We need to get to market. And you
that's
see
right.
the results of that and these attacks on a daily basis.
So, Matt, before we run out of time, I want to make sure we learn a little bit about your 2 ventures, OODA and Devsec. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing with them. What's
Yes, I think, at the high level, I operate this startup studio in Reston, Virginia called the Hack Factory.
okay?
And super exciting because I have a lot of great entrepreneurs building super interesting companies. So if Title Cyber is there, if you're familiar with that team, I've got
Yep.
the Cover AI team there. I've got Blackwire Labs. And then, of course, my consulting company, OODA, and then another one of our studio projects that I participate, in a management capacity, Devsec. So OODA is a combination of things. One, we provide consulting services primarily to boards and executives to get them to understand how to manage risk at enterprise level. Uh, Sometimes there's some associated red teaming with that to help raise the awareness, but really it is just drawing on the 30 plus years of experience I have. My partner, Bob Gorley, is a former CTO of the Defense Intelligence Agency. We've got a team there that has a lot of experience and has encountered a lot of these issues and problems and helps companies, develop strategies at the board level or even hold themselves accountable. And then the other element of OODA is we operate this thing called the OODA network, which is 400 professionals that interact in a Slack channel, get together on a monthly Zoom call, hold happy hours and dinners at events like RSA and Black Hat. We host a big, huge pool party. Where they want to be sharing information around disruptive technologies, cybersecurity, geopolitical risk. And there's an independent research team assigned to that network that goes and does the research on the latest and greatest, and what does an executive need to know to understand where quantum computing is going, or what's happening with space innovation or biomedical. So it's a super unique entity. And then once a year, we bring everybody together for an annual conference called OODA. So it's a super kind of interesting, diverse business. And then Devsec is something we launched out of the studio, my startup studio, that is focused on providing technologies that support very large scale fraud, liquidations, breach, and other types of investigations using LLM enabled technologies. So it turns out that, something like analysis of all of the data associated with a large scale fraud or a large scale liquidation, um, that would typically be, a lot of eyeballs on screens, a lot of looking at documents. You can build custom purpose LLM technologies and the associated data architectures to augment and assist the humans in that. So super interesting. The technology has been used to solve a bunch of different cases. It's being used in a lot of different interesting markets. So keeps my days very busy, working with the entrepreneurs in the Hack Factory, doing the consulting through OODA, interacting with the OODA network, and then helping the team internally build out the DevSec capability.
So are you putting forensic accountants out of a job?
I don't know about forensic accountants, but I think, we're certainly going to augment the capabilities of kind of traditional investigators, though. Forensic accountants is a little, eventually an LLM well for sure, but, we're a little bit more focused on studying the data, the who, what, where, the corporate structure, the gems hidden in the data that kind of indicate where, stuff might be hidden, deployed, or who's responsible for what. It also turns out it's super well suited to, look at like breach investigations and things of that sort and make sense of them. There are tasks that are impossible to write Boolean queries for. Example I always use is if you're doing a large scale crypto investigation and I'm looking for seed phrases that might have been shared in, one of our data sets around one of these investigations, 5 million documents. I want to see, did a user in a Slack message or an email or in a document or, stored in a drive, was there any seed phrase material? I can't write a Boolean query. I can't get a traditional e-discovery tool to do that for me, but you can get an LLM to do it for you because they understand some of these kind of, I'll call them human explainable problems. A seed phrase is 12 or 24 words. It's comprised of words from this dictionary. It likely has a precursor numeral 1, 2, maybe comma, tab, space, carriage return delimited. But then most importantly, are 12 words that do not make sense as an English language sentence, right? We have lots
Mhm.
of patches of 12 words, but the LLM is smart enough to say like, oh, these 12 words look like a sentence. These 12 words are part of a sentence. These 12 words are part of a sentence. And then it encounters 12 that do not make sense, and you have a potential seed phrase. The alternative to doing that analysis is have a human being look at 5 million documents and try and visually
Oh,
identify
that
these
that
seed
job would
phrases.
suck. Yeah, that is very cool. And you can perform that analysis probably in hours, if not
Super
less.
quick. Yeah,
Super
no,
quick.
it's super quick, right? I mean, I don't want to pretend like it's an easy problem to solve, because when you're doing investigations, maintaining context matters. Traditional approaches to, large data ingest with LLMs lose a lot of context. So there's kind of like a lot of vectorization of the data, a lot of context maintenance that we need to do, right? Like I would say you have to get the data in a position where the LLM can robustly analyze it, because the kind of current solutions are not well suited for that. So that's been kind of the secret sauce with the DevSec team, is understanding that ingest, parsing, maintaining context, vectorizing the data, and putting it in a format that's suitable for an LLM to be able to perform analysis against.
That's a very cool application. That have you made any progress on getting better with attribution?
I would say, as it relates to the data that we look at, yes, right, which are some of these large scale fraud, again, large scale liquidations, where it's able to piece together, parts of the puzzle that maybe again would require a large amount of human analysis, or in the case of, one thing that we worked on, the humans just couldn't find the connections, but the technology could.
Very cool. Well, Matt, we're pretty much at the hour. I want to also open up the floor to you. Anything you want to plug? Anything you want to let our audience know about?
No, I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. It was fun. Easy to find online. So I don't know if in the show notes, you can obviously put a connection to my website or
We
LinkedIn or
will.
Twitter or whatnot. So happy to connect and hear from people that are members of your audience.
Uh, Just be careful what you ask for. Yeah, we'll link up in the show notes. We'll put your information in. I think people would be fascinated to get in touch with you and to learn a little bit more about your writings. I think there'll probably be a bunch of searches on some of your works.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll be searching for, terrorist toasters, though.
Well, we've let everything into our homes. I mean, our the TV even knows what you're doing anymore. And if
Yeah,
you read the
TV,
fine print
fridge.
in Samsung's license agreement, they have the
Yeah,
right to do that. You
yeah,
gave them that right. So
yeah. TV, fridges, toasters, microwaves, water heaters, light bulbs, thermostats, right? Like we've definitely pulled the risk closer to us as individuals as well.
uh, Matt, it's been a fantastic episode. Thank you for coming on the show. Would love to get you back again in the future at some point. I don't think we got through any of these questions. I'm looking at them.
Yeah, no, happy to have a follow up. So,
Yeah.
all means. I mean, I love talking about this stuff. It's obviously a passion. I've made my whole career of trying to have great conversations around these issues. So, always appreciate the opportunity.
Knowledge to everyone.
What I would put one last plug in there that the audience might find useful is I do have an LLM that's trained on me at just Devost.ai. So it has the stuff that I've written, it has all the interviews that I've given, the presentations, but then also I uploaded as supplemental training material about 3,000 documents that influenced my decision making or my perspective on these topics. So it's also great for surfacing source material. And as you know, in cybersecurity, it's complex, right? Like we both have a lot of
Yeah.
experience, but I couldn't tell you what the difference is between this cybersecurity framework 1.3 and 2.0, but my LLM can because it's got perfect knowledge of both documents. So I always encourage people go. I make it available for free, really just as a tool for people to interact with and learn and surface resources that might be useful to them.
That's fantastic. Fantastic. We have a very similar vCISO app on our website
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
that tries to do the same thing. It's free.
yeah,
Just surface it, but we'll link up to that for sure, Matt.
yeah.
That's really good that you're doing those things. Again, thank you so much, Matt. It was an honor to have you on the show, and we'll love to have you back sometime.
Perfect. Yeah, count me in. Thank you.
Take care.